All right, I'm going to kick this off. So we're group number one. We were trying to get a bit more clear on how we're thinking about AI coordination internationally and potential approaches to governance. And obviously, this is like a really huge question. So we tried to at first think about what are the various incentives that could get different groups on board. What is sort of like an overall structure that we would feel hopeful about? And there's a bunch here that is like absolutely not fleshed out. As you can imagine, we're like a lot of like sub-threads in discussion. But we started to think about maybe we can come up with a tiered approach where different amounts of different types of solutions are available for different types of models. So this is the thing we've come up with so far. The idea was basically that we think some sort of global public-private partnership on AI might meet a lot of the needs, and that we think it's important to maintain also some amount of national sovereignty and have to not impede innovation for models that don't in fact pose like the highest levels of risks. So our goal with this three-tiered model was to try and differentiate as much as possible here. And the idea was to differentiate between the highest risk models, which are here under class 1. Sometimes the term frontier is used, but maybe in the future that's not the right term anymore, but this is sort of how we started here. The second class is the medium risks, where our thinking is these can be trained locally in the individual countries, but would still need to pass international standards. And the third class is low risk, which is fully under national jurisdiction. They can be open sourced, or this is like up to the countries themselves to determine how they want to deal with this. And we focused mostly on thinking about how to deal with the highest risk models. And our idea there was to consider creating some sort of international compute resource which pools resources and tries to meet the highest possible security standards. So this would be, for example, an air-gapped facility and has in place various infrastructural components that are really expensive for individual actors like companies to actually set up. And the idea is that this is sort of like a cloud compute service where like various security services are already inbuilt and various public and private actors can rent the usage of these GPUs. We propose that this would be probably located in some sort of politically neutral place, such as maybe somewhere in Europe, maybe Switzerland. And the idea is that the tool of compute governance is used to enforce what kind of runs should be taking place here and which ones can be in the other categories. We imagine that there is an international council where we still have like various confusions on how this should be composed, which governs the creation of a standards council, which determines standards which differentiate within which of the tiers a given model is, where the idea is something around like maybe compute threshold is the right number, maybe it's not, but that's some sort of like initial proxy for whether this differentiation process needs to be run for a certain model. And then the model can be classed into, all right, you can do whatever you want, or you need to comply by these international standards, or training should be happening within this secured facility. We sort of think that this type of like differentiation seems like something where it's really important to various like experts to have access to. So it seems really important that the Standards Council is not, is like in fact a place where like researchers on these models can continuously update what the appropriate standards would be, and we're not stuck in some sort of like faulty, slow system. We're not really sure yet how to get this loop working correctly, but having some sort of like international resource on the standards seems really important in all the scenarios we can imagine. Some of the thinking here is that the training and development, because the security in this system is like, at a certain level that like basically companies and also private and public actors have full freedom on what they actually want to train here. It's just what comes out that is regulated. So you need to pass some amount of like standardized international benchmarks in order to justify having your model leave the facility or interface with something outside of the facility. I probably forgot a bunch of stuff. Oh yeah, some of our like biggest questions are how do we deal with like military usage? And also like how to like fund the construction, how to like govern the resource allocation within this resource. It seems like most solutions that are feasible need to maintain the current power structure. At the same time, it's unclear whether that would remain equitable in the long term. So there's like a lot of open questions around that. Oh, also maybe I should mention briefly like what are the incentives for various groups to want to participate in this. For governments, it offers them a seat at a table and some amount of like institutionalized benefit from like the development of frontier AI. For firms, we're imagining things like perhaps because this is a democratically governed council, there would be things like maybe it's possible to negotiate or even mandate exclusive deals on frontier chips with ASML and TSME, where the next generation chips would only be available within this facility, or only the types of quantities that might be desirable would only be available in this facility. In addition, there could be something around promising freedom from liability for firms that actually comply with these standards and go through this process, from current liability and future liability. Lastly, there might be ways to design financial incentives due to the pooled resources to actually create these types of really expensive infrastructure for like the security stuff. And finally, maybe there's something where financial risks for firms can be reduced by participating in this partnership due to the GPUs being housed here, for example, and them not needing to invest as large amounts in owning them.
Great. You're at time.
All right.
Thank you. Questions, comments, concerns? Do you have the other mic? Any chance? Oh, yeah. Then I can do a mic runner. Questions, comments, concerns, helpful feedback. All of it is requested, you guys. Think of yourself as like, a very happy, a mix between a red teaming and a peer review, and also collaborating council here.
Do you think, how critical is it that the incentives are sufficient to get frontier developers to participate versus some who would decide, we're good because they're not strong enough?
So whether it's critical, it seems really critical. Whether they're strong enough, I don't really know. I think there's a whole bunch of uncertainty. Probably we could also come up with more incentives, and there'd have to be a whole bunch more research into what would actually be convincing.
So another thing is that one of the main angles that we're addressing this through is through compute governance. So the idea here is that the most dangerous or capable or frontier models would be trained within this air-gapped, within these premises in Switzerland or whatever, right? So sure, we would need to attract a lot of the talent, a lot of the technical talent to develop these models. But at the end of the day, the idea is that through these international cooperation mechanisms, we can make sure that the one initiative that has the edge in developing the frontier models is this one that is done internationally in a secure way. So even if other people have access to talent, they'll be developing smaller, narrower models.
Questions, comments, requests? Yes, go for it.
So given that the freedom from liability is one of the carrots that is being put in front of for the compliance of licensing, if I understood correctly, how do you expect an institution to learn in the case of failure if the liability isn't incorporated into the license being non-complied, or that there was some accident that occurred that maybe the license revision would help?
So this is not really a license, it's more like compliance with standards. I guess the idea is basically that this would decrease incentives to try to go rogue and still try to develop external AI. I think the idea is, there could probably still be accidents, but this council is now owning that that's because their standards or their implementation of the standards was flawed, and they're no longer publishing the companies for these accidents. Does that address your question? Okay, feel free to follow up if you feel like there's stuff left.
Okay. Any other questions, points, suggestions, helpful remarks?
I also want to say something obviously this is extremely rudimentary, and there's so much, what's actually, the devil is definitely in the details, and the details are not on this whiteboard. But this is an initial idea.
What would be the first step to get it to happen if you're trying to work on this tomorrow?
Honestly, probably to try and do a bunch more research on what types of incentives we can offer, and how realistic are these, and how much weight do they pull from which actors. How much interest is there actually in participating in something like this? Maybe also doing more research on I'm not a security expert, I kind of just said air gap, but I'm not really sure that that's the thing we need. Maybe there's other things we need. And figuring out how expensive is this, crunching some numbers on how many players would need to be on board for this to work at all.
Cool. And we are right on time. Thank you so much, guys.